Okay. So today in our Prairie Rose After School AI Sandbox, we are doing two things that might be not super familiar to teachers in Prairie Rose, but are ones that we definitely want you to know about. First of all, we're going to look at Google Gemini and then another Google product, Google Notebook. And I'm going to just, before I get too far down the road there, let's see about our guest today. Have you used Gemini before, Google's Gemini, or have you used or heard of NotebookLM? So if you can let us know in the chat, you can let us know. And Kellyanne, you can pop in and give us some updates on that. While we're waiting for people to respond, I'm just going to give us a little bit of a overview of how this all kind of fits together. So Gemini is a product that we haven't really, type of product that we haven't really looked at in our series so far. So far, we've been looking at the types of educational AI products above the box on the bottom. Today, we're looking at one that's actually a large language model. So Gemini is an equal to essentially ChatGPT. So probably ChatGPT might have been the first large language model that you started to use. Most of you have used ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. Gemini is, it could be a replacement for ChatGPT or another choice. So one of the things that, if you've heard me talk before, I've often said, it's great to cross compare or compare across tools. And so if you're not using one of this tools above, like we've talked about Magic School or Brisk or School AI or Diffit, those really specific ones, if you like to work in a large language model, which the others are built on top of, it's great to have a couple tabs open, ChatGPT, Gemini, maybe Copilot, which we also have accessible at Prairie Rose, and see what does the same prompt produce in each of those large language models. And so that's a great way to check, to do a little bit of 80-20, to check its bias, to check its accuracy, is to run it through different models and see how they are comparing. And so we haven't really ever done a session on ChatGPT a whole lot. Maybe since the very first one, Kellyanne, that we did.
I was going to say, like when it first launched.
Yes. And so Gemini, we're going to just show it as a comparison because it's such good practice to, if you're using ChatGPT, well, what does Gemini say? Or what does, sometimes I have Perplexity in that bottom box. I say I don't have that today. And then all the other tools. And I would say NotebookLM would probably fit above our tools built on top of those large language models. So Kellyanne, update on, has anyone used?
So we've got a Gemini user, but no one has used Notebook.
All right. So when we look at Gemini, and I'm just going to pop right into Gemini so you can see my Gemini screen here, you'll notice that it looks quite a lot like ChatGPT. Yeah. It's got a similar setup. And you can see that it's got that feel. You enter your prompt at the bottom, and it is pretty similar. Now, we haven't had, so a little history about Gemini. Gemini has only been available in Canada for just over a year. Google's initial large language model was called Bard, Google Bard, and it actually never was available in Canada. If you try to use Google Bard, it said not available in your country yet. And most of the world had access to it, but Canada didn't. Last year, about in February, Google announced the name change from Bard to Gemini. And that was when Canada got access. So it's only been about a year, just over a year, that people have had access to Gemini. And so people are, you just use ChatGPT because that's the thing that you've had. And so people just, we tend to keep using what we know, right? So Gemini, just at the very end of 2024, Prairie Rose has turned on Gemini and NotebookLM for use for Prairie Rose teachers. Now, a couple things about Gemini is that right now you can now use Gemini within our school district domain. So you can use your login to log into Gemini. Now, there's some advantages to that in that when we use it in our domain, and I'm just going to look at, go to a chat that I have. If you can see at the very, very bottom of my chat, make it a little bigger, don't know if you can see that a whole lot.
Mm.
Look at the very bottom. Your Prairie Rose Public Schools chats aren't used to improve our models. And so that's one of the benefits is that it's not using our chats for training. It's not using our data for training. So much safer than using, if you're like me and you don't have a paid version of ChatGPT, you're using your ChatGPT with your Gmail or just out in the wild. You're just using a consumer version of ChatGPT. If you're using it within our school district, even though we don't have the paid Gemini, which is about $30 Canadian a month, even in the free Gemini that we have, it's safer. And so it doesn't use it to train, and it doesn't use it to train its Gemini large language model, and it isn't human monitored, so that people aren't like looking at your data and that kind of thing. So that makes it a good use case, right? And so again, how do I use Gemini? Well, actually, let's just do a new thing in Gemini here. Let's ask it a question, an educational question. You are a grade 6 teacher. You are teaching math, and you want to include some spiral review in your lessons. Do you know what spiral review is? So let's just first of all make sure it knows. Okay, so in math, so now we're doing our 80-20, right? We're checking. In math, it means instead of teaching a topic and never touching it again, we bring it back regularly. We don't cram the practice into one day. We spread it out over days and weeks and months. We gradually increase the complexity. Okay, Tiffany, what do you think? Does it know spiral review?
For the most part.
It's got a good understanding.
Understanding, yep.
Okay, good. So now it says, why is it important for grade 6? So it's given us even more than I asked for. Oh, and now it's actually, I only asked it if it knew what it was, but it's gone ahead and it's predicted some of the things that I might ask it. So how I'd implement it, warm-up activities, weekly review. Okay, so I'm going to go with math centers, and I'm going to say, can you give me some examples of math centers for, I don't know, place value? Is place value still a important concept that you struggle with in grade 6?
Yeah, mostly in decimals, right?
Place value, math centers for place value with decimals. Okay, let's see what it does. Okay, so while it's doing that, let's come up here. One of the things that Gemini does is it now it's showing us some of its content. This is where it's gotten its material from. So I could go to each of these. Now, this is a .com, but this one is uchicago.edu. So this is an academic institution. And this one is a .org, Learning Scientists. So at least 2 of the 3 of those are educational type sites. And so that is a great thing that we can do. Now, underneath here in Gemini, so I've got share. So I could send that to a Google Doc if I wanted. I could open it or send it to Gmail, which we're not using yet. Or I could also have it read it back to me, but I can also double check response. And so this is a neat feature with Gemini. So I clicked on double check response. And then what it should do, there we go. Can you see, hopefully you can see on your screen, there's some areas that are in green. And so if I wanted to say, well, does it know what it's talking about? Here's kind of why it's important for grade 6. If I click on these, Google search found similar content, and it talks about the sites that it's from. So it's kind of often when we've been talking about digital citizenship and digital literacy, we talk about lateral reading. So here it's helping us to do some lateral reading. Here's that UChicago site again. So it's saying here's some other places that you can look at. So we could certainly use those, or I would suggest that we would also just do our own Google search as well if we want to check that. So here's the decimal places, activities, decimal, roll it, build it, decimal place card sort, decimal place detectives, task cards. All right, so I haven't looked at those carefully, but I'm thinking, wow, those are hands-on. They don't sound or look like worksheets. That's probably exactly the kind of thing that I was looking for. Now we could go further. It says create a set of cards where each card has a decimal and a who has. We could continue down the road with Gemini and we could say, okay, can you create those cards in a spreadsheet that's printable? And we could ask it for specific items in a spreadsheet, in a chart, in those kinds of things. But today, I don't want to focus on how to use Gemini necessarily, other than it's got some of these features that we're looking at. When we rate a response as good or bad, it's basically helping to train the model. We can upload. So if you see on the bottom here, it said if I hover over the plus, I can add files. Yep.
I just wanted to ask if it says that it's not using our chats to improve the model, does our rating actually even matter in Gemini?
Well, it's still like, because it gives it this, it's still it would take that as data,
Okay.
but it wouldn't necessarily, like, it's not you. Yeah. So I that's a good question, Kellyanne, but I don't know. Don't click it. You can regenerate if you want. So sometimes it's here's a redo. And so it's given me, decimal place bingo, so it's scavenger hunt, a place value war. Oh, that would be a good one. All right, so all sorts of activities there. And then if I want to put those into a Google Doc, I can go share, export to docs, and then down in the bottom left-hand corner, open doc, and there it's popped it into a doc for me without having to cut and paste. So that's kind of nice because that will now be found in my Google Drive. So if it was a spreadsheet, it would open up there as well. Now at the bottom here, you can see I asked it to redo. So this says 2 of 2. Can you see right down here? If I go back, there's my original. And so maybe I'm going to say, hey, can you, actually this time I'm going to say copy because I don't want 2 docs. I'm just going to come to the bottom one here and I'm going to paste that in. Formatting isn't quite as nice. Look at that. But I don't want 2 docs that have the same thing. I want them all in one. So that's Gemini. If you have any questions, let me know. They do have this is the Flash version. And up here, if you have multi-step reasoning, or if you want something that's a little deeper, you could try the thinking experimental Flash model. I haven't used that or tried that much. It's just come online pretty new. So a quick overview of Gemini, very similar to ChatGPT. It also, image of the Canadian Shield in the winter. It also has an image model. This is not as big a deal because ChatGPT's free version is now doing images as well. But initially, Gemini was a really easy way to do images if you didn't have access to other tools. Okay, that one gave me a photo.
Is there a limit, Cami? I just learned today that the free chat is only 3 a day. So does this have a limit?
And so that's a change. Like I've been using Gemini more than ChatGPT, and so I haven't even been using ChatGPT enough to get into that. But yeah, so there's no. I'm not going to say there's no limit, but if you're stuck to 3 in ChatGPT, come to Gemini, right? Like there's way more than 3. Like for sure, there's no 3 limit here. So another good reason. That's a great thing to bring up. Okay, so that's Gemini. Now let's head over to another Google product called NotebookLM. So NotebookLM is it's built for Gemini. It's a Google product, but what it does is it allows you to create you take your work, your documents, things that you've created. So there might be PDFs that you've created about a topic, or it might be your study notes. It might be all the sheets or all the information that you have for a particular unit. And then you can upload one or more documents into a note, and it will create some things for you. So I'm going to open one. It does take a little while to generate. So I'm going to open one that I have previously made. So this is grade 4 and 5 social studies. So what I did here was I have a copy of some textbook PDF chapters from grade 8 social studies. So if we take a look around here, it will create a couple things for me. Now, I haven't done this yet. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So this is kind of the Japan era of the textbook from grade 8 social studies. So I can ask it to create a study guide. So on the right-hand side here, I'm going to say study guide. And this is creating a study guide. So I'm going to open that up. And so here it is, it gives me a quiz with an answer key. It gives me some potential essay questions. It gives me a glossary of terms. All right, so if I want to say convert to source, now that puts it into a file that I can use again later. These, so I can name it or remove it. If I use something in what's called the studio, it is view only and it will disappear after a while. So I could also make, this actually a timeline for a social studies book might be a really great one as well. Now, imagine it's not a history class, like this is going to be actually a very historical document. Imagine that it is school documents. Maybe it is school meeting notes. Okay, so you're the vice principal of a school and you have all your staff meeting minutes for the year and you want to have a summary or you want it to pull out the action items. It could do something like that. Okay, here is the timeline. So 1500, 1603. All right, so it's gone into, again, it's using the document and it's pulling not from the expansive internet, not from a large language model where the everything is. This is pulling from your information, and that's partly what makes it so possible. Now, this is not specific to Cami or specific to Prairie Rose. This is, pretty internet common. It's extra interesting when you pull it from something that is like your actual work that you've done, but it'll do the same thing for that based on your module. So I'm going to go convert to source. I'm going to put that over here. And then on this one, I'm going to say rename source. I'm going to call this timeline. Okay, so again, it's taking my materials and converting them. Now, other products, we could do that in ChatGPT. We could do that in Gemini. Most of them allow some file uploads. The benefit to NotebookLM is that it will allow 50 uploads. So I can have, actually, let's go here. If I come over here, add to source, we can see the kinds of things that we can add. It gives us examples. So marketing plans, course readings. So imagine, I think most of us have finished our masters, but imagine you're doing your masters or your PhD and you've got all these readings and you haven't gotten through them all. You could upload them and ask it for summary, or you could ask it all sorts of things, including what I'm going to show you next. Research notes, meeting transcripts. I've actually taken a transcript from a webinar like this or from a meeting. Actually, Kelly had a drone games meeting. I've took the Google Meet transcript and put it in and asked for it to create a task list. And it's done that beautifully. Now, other tools can do that, but this one is great if you have many things, not just one or two. Now, you can see here, I can do a doc or a slide deck, YouTube or a website. I can also paste text in here, and I can have, if you can see in the bottom right, 50 items. Now, are you ready is everyone sitting down? First of all, that's what we have to make sure of. Here's the thing that this really does neat. What happens is it also will create an audio overview. And I ran this ahead of time because it takes a little bit of time to run. Now, I'm disappointed this particular time because it's 25 minutes. And I was hoping for something more in the nature of 10 or 15 minutes, because I think if I actually read the chapters out loud or recorded them, it probably wouldn't take 25 minutes. So this audio tool, it actually creates a podcast, is quite we can't refine it granularly yet. Like we can actually, I could have asked it for something specific. I could say, give me a, a high level overview of the Edo period. Don't go into a lot of specifics, and it would do that. What it won't do is give me a 10-minute podcast or a 5-minute podcast. Like we know, AI isn't great at telling time. But are you ready? Kellyanne, can you let me know? I can't. Oh, actually, I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear my audio? I should have tested this before and I didn't. Okay. So here comes the podcast. Are you hearing anything? Okay. Um, okay. I'm going to change how I'm sharing so that I can make sure I get this. Chat among yourselves for a moment, please.
It's too bad if they were accepting feedback. A time frame for that probably is like the most critical part that teachers would want, right? Like
Yeah.
if you could set it to 5 minutes, 10
Yeah.
minutes,
Well,
like
it's making changes all the time. They now have an interactive mode in beta, which you can like kind of interact and ask it questions. But once you hear this podcast, like, yes, hopefully they'll get a time and more granular pieces. But okay, are you ready? Here comes the
ready.
podcast.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're
You hear it
diving
now?
into Japanese history and specifically the period between 1600 and 1900.
Wow.
It's a time of incredible transformation.
Yeah.
You know, going from an isolated nation to a major player on the world stage.
It really is.
We're going to use 3 key sources to guide us on this journey.
Okay.
We have a briefing document titled Japan's Transformation, 1600 to 1900. And then we have excerpts from 2 textbooks, Nelson 4-GR8.pdf
Okay.
and Nelson 5-HGR8.pdf.
Sounds good.
So buckle up because we're about to explore how Japan went from being completely closed off to a global powerhouse.
It's a fascinating story. It really is about internal development and those external pressures and ultimately a nation reinventing itself.
Yeah, it almost seems impossible.
It does.
Like to go from a completely closed off society to a global power in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
How is that even possible? Where do we even begin to unpack this?
Well, I think a good starting point is the Edo period,
Okay.
which lasted from 1603 to 1867. Now, this was an era of, peace and stability.
Okay.
But it came at a cost because Japan basically shut itself off from the rest of the world.
Right. It's what we call the Sakoku period.
Exactly.
So
Okay. Based on that little start, put your mics on, type away. What are your initial reactions?
It's almost surprising at like how conversational it is, because so many times when you use things that you're using it to create like a Siri or a Alexa or whatever, it's so robotic.
Yes.
And that seems very natural.
Yes. So if I hadn't told you that those were computer generated, AI generated voices, you initially likely wouldn't have even imagined that they were. Is that fair?
I would agree. Yeah.
It's almost like a sketch comedy. Like the beginning, he's saying something, she kind of interjects. She's like, wow. Like there's so many layers that make it just so real.
Well, it is. So I'm going to just push it ahead so we get into the middle of it, and we'll listen a little bit more just so we can listen to that natural sense of banter.
Shozan
okay.
and Yoshida Shoin,
Uh-huh.
both samurai thinkers who grappled with how Japan should respond to this challenge.
Okay.
Shozan believed in selective adoption of Western methods, particularly in military technology.
Okay. So like strengthening their defenses.
Yes. He argued that by strengthening Japan,
Mm-hmm.
they could eventually negotiate with the West from a position of power.
I see, playing the long game.
Exactly. What about Yoshida Shoin?
Yeah. What was his take?
Not quite the same.
Okay.
Shoin was far more radical.
Really?
He vehemently opposed the shogunate
Wow.
and advocated for the restoration of the emperor to full power.
Okay.
He believed that Japan should resist Western encroachment at all costs.
So a much more hardline stance.
Yes, there's even a story about Shoin trying to sneak onto one of Commodore Perry's ships.
What, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about bold.
He was caught, imprisoned, and eventually executed.
Oh, wow.
But his ideas, his defiant spirit resonated with those who yearned for a strong, independent Japan.
I see. So despite his fate, his message lived on.
It did this clash of ideologies, you know,
Yeah.
this struggle to define Japan's future. It was
Uh-huh.
reaching a boiling point.
Okay.
Okay, so can you think of all the ways that we could use this? Imagine studying for an exam and uploading your study guides, your course notes. Like some schools are allowing their kids to use NotebookLM to study for social studies. So while you're in the car, while you're driving, the podcast, you can download the podcast. I think it's a WMV file, which you can use in other places. I use this for our School of Trades, where you have high school students, largely boys, that are not typically strong. They're typically not our strong academic students. They don't love reading, many of them, but yet the course is a bunch of module work where they have to read PDFs and watch videos and then learn this and do some testing before they go do the practical. So what we've been doing is we've been taking that material, which is sometimes, hours of videos and PDF reading that we know the teachers know they're not doing, putting it into a podcast and then having them listen. And one of the things that I love is as they're bantering, as they're interacting, he's picking up like key things. He's like, well, so you mean this, right? So there's that little built-in retrieval practice, or that built-in clarifying. So as opposed to someone just going on and talking, that banter back and forth helps clarify and identify key points and interactions and connections. So so many uses of NotebookLM. And so that audio piece, that podcast piece with those very realistic type voices is so potentially powerful. Thoughts on where you might use that, or what you might generate for your students, or any use case?
It would be really helpful
Go ahead,
in places. Sorry, it would be really helpful in places where it's really text heavy and you don't have a lot of other resources kind of built into that already.
Mm-hmm.
Like new science, or things like that, where you're looking for other ways to get students to engage with the same material.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they had a paper copy of something, they can listen to it read to them in a different way, which their understanding is so different from when they're reading compared to when they're listening, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I was just going to say, Cami, we've had quite a few teachers want to do podcasting in their classrooms, but their students aren't always avid podcast listeners, and it can be tricky to find clips
the right content.
that are the right content. Or so this might be a way to really customize that and then have an exemplar.
Yeah, so right, you could find some real, like Mario Brothers versus, the X-Men or something, and
Yeah.
you have to find some sources to upload. But
Yeah.
it takes YouTube videos. Like it's so so neat. Now the YouTube videos, like most AI, have to be a YouTube video that has a transcript enabled, because that's where the AI pulls
Right.
it from. But that's pretty standard across models. But yeah.
The other thing I heard is that in testing, they are adding voices that you can choose from. So right now it's just those two, I understand it, but they're working on.
Yeah. Now these two are fairly good, fairly realistic. Yes. But so this is still, fairly new. They're looking at, controlling the time, at adding voices. Yeah, there's certainly lots on the roadmap. But right now it's Patty mentions, like for kids who have long bus rides. Yeah, for sure. So because it's so specific too, it's not like, when you make a YouTube video or you find an audio, it's like someone else's version of what they need, but this could be exactly what you need. So
Mhm.
Gemini and NotebookLM. We hope that those have been interesting to you and that you will maybe try them out. And our next session is going
There we
to
go.
be, oh, today is March
That's
11th.
today.
Yeah, I forgot to update that. Our next one is
It was in our message, and it will be on March 25th. And it is the AI powered workspace EduAid.
EduAid, yes, which is one that I previously was not. It had a really small free content, but they've done some changes, and it's kind of Magic School-esque, but it has some really neat pieces for math and some really specific pieces that I'm kind of excited to show you. So that will be next time. And there's always a video available. So we thank you for joining us. Try Gemini. It has, we have it now accessible. You can make it in your Gmail account. We have it accessible in our Prairie Rose account, which is safer and unlimited. So if you're running up against that limit of ChatGPT, come to Gemini, and it's good to compare. So I'm going to stop recording. And if you have any questions, we'll certainly take those as well.